everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing immigration matters in divorce. I am joined by Matthew James from Bateswell Solicitors. Matthew's an associate in the immigration department, and his work covers all areas of personal and business immigration, with a particular focus on family relationships and post-Brexit. And that's why I was really interested in having him today. Matthew brings a wealth of experience in advising employers and individuals on the implications of Brexit and the EU settlement scheme. So we all know that immigration is a topic that's often intertwined with family law and divorce in particular, and people often don't understand the immigration implications of the family decisions they're making. And divorce can impact a parent's immigration status, also their ability to come back into the country later on to visit their children if their children are staying in the country. And because I work with expats and international couples, it's something that I notice people often are ill-informed about and they forget to consider when they're making divorce decisions. So I love your specific profile, Matt, on Brexit-related challenges. Because I work with so many French nationals who are living in the UK, a lot of people are confused about what the new rules are since Brexit and what that means. And immigration wasn't a concern until recently for these people. So it's really helpful to have you here today to share your insights and to answer my questions. So thank you so much, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So I'd love to start off with understanding, just from your experience, really, what are some of the most common immigration issues that occur during an international divorce?
Yeah, so I mean the big one is obviously if one of the parties in that relationship is here on a partner relationship visa. And that could be under the UK's immigration rules. It could be under the EU settlement scheme. So straight off the bat, we've got this confusing aspect where two people could be on two different visas, have very similar situations. You could have, two people married to, let's say two French nationals married to, one married to a French national, one married to a British citizen. They're going to potentially be on different routes and have different options available to them. So the key is to consider the immigration aspects as early as possible. And that will assist with a number of factors, least of all making it or taking it away from being an area of contention between the parties, and allowing you then to sort of not necessarily approach the visa issues or the immigration status as either a position of power or a lack of power when you come to talk about or start discussing the relationship breakdown.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think in a lot of cases, it is a slightly imbalanced position when there's someone who is in their home country getting divorced in a territory that they know with their friends and family around, but also with a legal system that's more familiar. The person who's not from that country is already at a disadvantage. So you definitely don't want their immigration status to be a bargaining chip in the divorce negotiation. And so for foreign nationals who want to stay in the UK, so imagine a French national living in the UK, married to a British man or woman, what are the most important things they need to be aware of to be able to stay in the UK and make sure that their divorce doesn't impact their ability to stay?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is that they need to consider what options they may have going forward. And again, this is going to be case by case basis. First thing is if they're in a relationship with a British citizen or they're married to a British citizen, and that's the basis of their visa, the relationship or the requirements for the relationship under that visa are for the relationship to be sort of genuine and subsisting.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be the case that you're going to be able to just delay the divorce for the purposes of securing your visa. If the relationship is done, then your right to be on that visa to a certain extent is done.
Even if you're not officially divorced, you mean?
Even if you're not initially divorced,
okay.
Even if you just started the proceedings, or even if you haven't even got to that stage yet, but you've moved out.
Okay.
you're living apart. Obviously, the big indicator is if one of the parties has another partner.
Yeah.
But you're not, officially divorced. At that point, actually, your entitlement to the visa or you're meeting the requirements of the visa fall away, and you have a duty to report to the Home Office. I mean, there is a huge caveat there, which is relationships are not necessarily, binary on or off. So it's not a case that you have a row, you move out for a couple of days, you think you have to phone the Home Office and leave the country. It's not like that. It is, they are going to be looking for a little bit more permanency to the end of the relationship. But it's not the case that you should be looking at going. And this is when we talk about the bargaining chips. It's not a case that the British partner can be like, well, I will, if you give me this, I will sign off on your visa application, because that's not how it works.
Needs to be an
So
honest declaration about them being in a relationship. Yeah.
Exactly, and let's say, and we get to that point, and we say, okay, the relationship's done. I am now going to, getting legal advice. I'm going to consider my options, and you're considering your options. You notify the Home Office.
Yeah.
What the Home Office will then do is they will shorten your visa to 60 days in normal cases, if you have longer than 60 days left on it. So let's say you've got your 2.5 year visa, you're halfway through it. Instead of having a year left, you get 60 days shortened,
It's really
or
quick.
shortened to 60 days. But I mean, it gives you enough time to sort of put your affairs in order if you want to leave the country, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, those that want to leave. But it also gives you time to go, okay, well, what's my next application?
Yeah.
And this is when we say it's important to get the advice early on, because if you've got your ducks in a row before you make that notification, you know the application you're going to be making.
Yeah.
What also is helpful is if in some circumstances it does happen, that there is another relationship involved that you're now in as a person, and you're looking to then potentially switch sponsorship from one partner to the new partner.
Yeah.
By notifying the Home Office, it doesn't then surprise them that they've got this application, which was of someone that they previously thought was sponsored by one person, has now moved on to someone else.
Yeah.
But that's not the only option people may have if you're working and you feel as though the relationship's a little bit rocky. You can talk to the employer as to whether or not there's scope for sponsorship, for them to
Yeah.
take you on as a sponsored worker. And for couples that have children, there is the ability to remain in the UK as a parent of a child. And so that is another thing that can be considered. So it's all about checking what your options are.
Yeah. So they would have to apply for a new type of visa. For example, if they were going for a parental visa, it's a whole new
Exactly.
process.
Yeah, a new type of
Yeah.
visa. Frustratingly, sort of the clock to settlement starts again.
Okay.
So there are sort of implications that need to be considered, and sort of not strangely but oddly, the way that the Home Office works is that it doesn't accept a parent application from
Yeah.
someone who is in a relationship with a partner. So if you
Oh,
are coming to making the application as a
yeah.
parent of a British child, or a child who's been living in the UK for 7 years, then you're going to need to be providing evidence that the relationship has broken down, which could just be a letter from your partner saying, yep, the relationship's broken down. Doesn't need to be the divorce certificate. But
So yeah, so
it's
there's other
yeah,
routes basically in this kind of context, but it's just about looking at them early on because 60 days will happen quite fast. So you want to
exactly.
make sure that you're aware.
Yeah, and again, the other side of it is that the Home Office is very slow to write to people, so actually you might end up not getting anything. The key part of that period, though, is travel, and this
Ah,
is where we see people do get caught out a little bit, because if the Home Office does serve this notice of the curtailment of the visa,
yeah,
and that you're outside of the UK when that's received, then
yeah.
that could be your visa being cancelled.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
in addition, if you get that notification and then you leave before sorting out your immigration status, then again you can't return. You haven't got a visa to return on.
Okay. So you need to
So
stay here.
and appreciate it can be quite difficult. It's a difficult situation to be going through, quite, in personal circumstances. The family support network may be overseas.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the importance of just getting the advice early, so that you're going
Yes.
into this with your eyes open and not being caught out.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's something that people need to be really aware of because when you're a foreign national, especially France is so close, people go back and forth and all of that, and they don't necessarily realize that.
Yeah.
That's a really good tip. Thank you. And so we think if we look at the opposite scenario, I guess, with a foreign national who's living in the UK but decides that post-divorce they want to move back to their home country, are there any potential risks with them being able to then come back to the UK on a regular basis, for example, to see their children?
It'll be, I mean, it'll be fact dependent on the individuals, but there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. There should still be the two sort of options, or two options available. If the home is very much now going to be overseas, the UK, and it is just wanting to come to the UK to visit the children, then the visit route is there, and that will be. Although I think in practice there probably hasn't felt to be too much of a difference. If you're an EU national entering the UK, you come in through the E gates. Previously you had a relatively good right to reside under free movement. Now you're entering as a visitor. But you can do that. You can spend up to 6 months at a time in the UK. You've got to be a genuine visitor, genuine reason for visiting, i.e. visiting family members. You can't be coming into work, but you can do some remote working. So if you're coming over for, I know, half term and you want to spend a week, but you've got emails, phone calls you've got to be taking during that period, that's fine. You've just got to be showing that you've got an intention to leave the UK at the end of it. So you're not looking to settle in the UK, you're not spending significant amounts of time in the UK, and you've got your ties to, let's say, France, for example. So your work's in France, your house is in France,
Yeah.
your other family commitments in France. So you can show those in case that's a problem. But that shouldn't be a problem. If you are what we call a visa national, as in you have to apply for a visa to come to the UK before you can arrive, then
Yeah.
there is the opportunity for the visit visas to apply for a multi-year one, so that you're not necessarily applying for a visa every time you want to travel, which make it easier if these things become, or you want a little bit of flexibility, as in it's now 2 weeks time is going to be a good time for you to come see your child, or the other partner is going into having a medical surgery or something like that, and they want you to come over and look after the children. You can get a multi-year visit up to 10 years, which again showing the evidence that you are not moving to the UK, you're permanently based somewhere else, but you've got this ongoing need to visit the UK, i.e. you've got a young child here. Then you can come and go. That would add some flexibility there. So there are routes available. The parent route would also work if you wanted to have a little bit more of a permanent visa, rather than a temporary one. You could still apply as a parent, to come
If
in
you're
and
not living there, but you would.
it would be depending on the facts. I think you want to be showing a little bit more permanency in terms of your residing. But if it is the case that you're looking to split your, let's say, your year, 6 months in France, 6 months in the UK, then that might be a better route for you, and it might then lead you to, if circumstances change and you suddenly say, actually I want to be spending more time with my family in the UK, then it gives you that opportunity further down the line.
Yeah.
Choosing one does not preclude using the other, if
Okay.
circumstances do change. So
Yeah, I
but
was going
again,
to
it's one of
ask
those.
you.
I mean, what people are probably going to get from this is that it's a lot more complicated than it used to be. It's not the case that you're just going to get on the train at Calais, and come to the UK. It is going to be a case that now you have to think about, okay, why am I coming? What are my long-term goals? And,
Yeah.
and 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 what do I want to be doing in the UK? And am I getting the right visa?
Yeah, so that's a good segue actually into my next question, which was going to be, could you talk us through these new rules? Because it used to be so easy to come in and out of the UK and to come live here, and now everything's changed. So it'd be really helpful to understand how it works today.
Yeah. So free movement ended. It ended at the end of 2020. So now all EEA Swiss nationals coming to the UK are come within the UK's immigration system.
Mhm.
For those who are residing in the UK prior to the end of the Brexit transition period, they have had the ability to apply for status under the EU settlement scheme.
Yeah,
So that would either be pre-settled status for those who have been living in the UK for less than 5 years, and settled status for those living in the EU who had lived in the UK for more than 5 years. I suppose what is potentially interesting about that is that if someone is in the UK under the settlement scheme
mhm,
and they have a new partner,
yeah,
then who may also be an EEA Swiss national, that partner's status is now dependent on that relationship.
oh,
Whereas in the
okay,
past, if you were a French national and you came and you were in a relationship with a French national and that broke down, it's fine because you could stay because you're an EU national.
yeah, yeah,
That's now gone. You're now within, the people that we were speaking about earlier of married to a British citizen. You're still in that sort of category now.
yeah,
Um, there again, as I mentioned, two different routes. So if your relationship was in existence prior to the end of the transition period, you may be on status under the EU settlement scheme, which might give you more rights or options in the event of a relationship breakdown under retained rights if you meet certain circumstances, which would not apply if you got married after or your relationship began after the end of the transition period and you came in and you're coming in under the UK's partner visa rules.
yeah,
So it suddenly just becomes more complicated. And I think with all of these things, the advice is key because your situation is not going to be the same as someone else's.
yeah,
I once had a client who came to me who said, "You helped my friend get his status, and I've got very similar circumstances."
yeah,
And I replied, "Well, your friend was an Egyptian national, came to the UK, applied for asylum, was refused asylum, married an EU national, lived in the UK with her for 5 years, and then got divorced. Um, what circumstances are similar for you?" And his response was, "I'm an Egyptian national." So completely different set of circumstances, and that's what people are going to have. And
yeah,
there's going to be lots of confusion. There is a lot of support out there for individuals, and I think people should look at it. But I think getting immigration advice, especially with the UK's approach to immigration
yeah,
being very very hostile,
yeah,
and it definitely is. It's not. It doesn't look after the individual.
no,
It's very much a, if you've done something wrong, that's your fault, and we're sort of holding our hands up about it. So it's getting the advice and getting the advice early so that you know
yeah.
what your options are.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think for those who missed the boat, basically, of getting the EU settled status before the transition period ended, then they have to resort to parental visas or spousal visas to be able to settle here again, right? They've lost their opportunity.
Exactly, they're looking at the other immigration routes, which are very limited. You're basically sponsored by an employer,
Yeah,
sponsored by an educational institute if you're being a student, or
yeah,
sponsored by a partner.
yeah,
So you there are very limited routes for you coming for someone wanting to come to the UK as an individual, if that sort of
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. And what about people who have settled status but then leave for a number of years? Do they lose it after a while? How does that work?
So settled status, they would lose it after 5 years.
Okay.
So they could leave after they could leave, and it's a continuous 5 year period. So in
Okay.
theory, if you've got settled status and you decide I'm going to move back to France, but I've got family in the UK, so I
Yeah.
visit Christmas every year, then your 5 year clock resets every time you come back to the UK.
Oh,
So
okay. Oh, that's pretty good.
it's
Okay.
not a huge commitment
Yeah.
to have to be in the UK. If you have secured indefinite leave to remain under a different category, otherwise other than the settlement scheme. So, for
Yeah.
example, you've done it on the basis of 5 years as a partner under the UK partner rules,
Yeah.
then instead of 5 years, it's 2 years. And I should also add that the rules are different again for Swiss nationals, just because
Yes.
the UK and the Swiss negotiated a separate agreement, so that's 4 years.
Okay.
So, and there's some other quirks for the Swiss as well. So,
So if
we,
anybody on the is listening who's from Switzerland, make sure that you check because it will be a slightly different set of rules. It sounds like they're more favorable though.
in part, yeah, in parts they are. In part, it's really odd. It doesn't really make much sense as to why either the UK or the Swiss decided they would go and make it this different. But yes, in parts it's better. In some parts, like it 4 years rather than 5 years, it's a little bit worse.
That's good to know. Thank you so much for sharing that, Matthew. That's really helpful. The kind of questions that I am always thinking about and I don't know the answers to. So before we wrap up, I always like to ask a last question before my guests move on. What would be your top three tips? So in this context, for UK-based expats who are getting a divorce, what would be your top three recommendations?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think it's getting the immigration advice early. So I think if you're thinking this relationship is on the rocks, I want to talk to a divorce coach, or I'm talking to
Yeah,
family lawyers. I think at that point you also want to be saying, I want to talk about the immigration laws because I want to know what impact it will have, because it may have an impact, it may not have an impact.
yeah,
And even if it does have an impact, there may be options. So it's about
yeah,
making sure that you're aware of those options early on. Um, the other side of it is that if possible, and I appreciate that it's not going to be the case in every relationship breakdown, some are just very toxic by nature. Others are slightly more, at the start, are
Mhm.
slightly more
Reasonable.
collaborative.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
before the lawyers are involved, before it goes a little bit more contentious, that's the best time to start thinking about the immigration aspects.
yeah.
And there's a couple of things that I think I've touched upon previously, but the power aspect, but things like you're not gonna, there's no real benefit to dragging a relationship out for immigration purposes, because that's not actually how the rules work. I mean, in some circumstances, it is based upon the date of divorce if it's under the settlement scheme, but there are other options available there. So I don't think you should be saying, I want to be we should be holding out on this relationship for the immigration purposes, or thinking that way through. The other side of it is we talk about the parent of a child route. You've got to show that you've got contact with the child and you're having involvement in that child's upbringing. But it's not a case that you have to have court ordered contact. So
Hmm.
you don't suddenly have to be going, I need to have contact with my child. So I'm applying for contact from a court. If you can agree that, at the outset, and you get the letter from the part of what the child's living with, then that's
Yeah.
fine. And you're avoiding, again, the fight of it. Children also, if you're two French nationals living in the UK and you have a child, your assumption may be that the child is French. The child
Hmm.
probably is French, but the child may
Yeah,
also be British.
that's true.
Um, it may not only be British, there may also be the opportunity for that child to be registered as British if it wasn't British
Hmm.
at birth.
Yeah,
And so if you're doing that, it's easier to do that together. But there's a benefit for the child.
yeah,
Obviously longer term if they want to be staying in the UK longer, or if their lives have been so far in the UK that actually you want to give them that future option. But again, that might involve involvement from both of the parents,
yeah,
which is then easier to sort out before everyone starts shouting at each other. Um,
mhm.
so I think those are. I know you said three. I don't know how many I've said. It's probably one and a half. But those are the sort of the key takeaways that I would always say is get the advice early and try and do it before it all gets nasty. Um,
Yeah,
sometimes that doesn't happen, in which case there are ways around it. But
yeah,
it's just one of those. If you can take the immigration, as you said, power imbalance out of it and
yeah,
just say actually it's in everybody's interest,
yeah.
you're not going to get your partner deported, just because
Enough.
they've wronged you. So
Yeah,
So I think, yeah, I think that would be what I would always be saying.
Yeah,
With that said, we do see to a certain extent a lack of knowledge of immigration impacts from family lawyers,
yeah,
because they're very good at family law. They're not great at immigration law. I'm
yeah.
terrible at family law, very good at immigration law. So it's the idea that saying, actually, do you know what? I know that I'm here on a visa. I know I'm here on sort of a temporary status, which is based on this relationship. So I know I need to get some advice on that, and not necessarily
And
rely upon it being picked up as you start the divorce proceedings.
yeah, keeping it front of mind really as part of the circumstances that you want to mention to your family lawyer if you're going down that route. But I think what,
Yeah,
what you're saying is really, I mean, it applies in all areas of life, but having information, that's really, information is going to be the key here.
yeah,
Knowing where you stand, what the risks are, depending on different avenues you might choose, and just making sure that you have that information before you make the decision, so
exactly.
that you can really make informed decisions.
Yeah,
And I like your point around the children as well, around thinking about the immigration status of the children, even if it is different to your own. It might be something that's worth sorting out before getting divorced. I agree. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. This was really insightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today.
no problem.
I really enjoyed all the information you shared. I would love to follow up with you on some of the EU elements, because those are always very, very complex. But thanks again for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. You too.
Take care.